Hey everyone, Ian here from Don the Stat. Look, this is just going to be a fun little thing. We often talk about who Essendon has rivalries with and which games you look forward to the most and the teams that you really want to beat. And I think we can make a definitive list of what that looks like for Bombers fans. And if you look at the rankings there, I've got 5 categories. And the first there at the top is extreme loathing. You completely hate these sides. You can't think of anything positive to say about them. The next level is resentment. No, that the hate is strong, but there's still little. It's not quite at the same level as those extreme loathing sides. Then you have the ill will sides, the ones that you're a little bit awkward about or you'd be concerned about. But again, they don't reach that next level. You've got the mess sides. You play them and then you move on. You don't really dwell on it too much. And finally, you got the irrelevant sides. You don't even think about it going into the match, and then once it's over, it's like it never happened in the first place. So we're going to go through alphabetically and just do a quick summary of where these teams will end up. So the first side that we're looking at is Adelaide, and Adelaide for me, it's a meh tier rivalry. Obviously, the 93 prelim is a great moment for Essendon, but in terms of back and forth between the sides, there's very little. Obviously, Adelaide had that 09 win in an elimination final, but that was coached by Matthew Knights and he didn't play ruckman, so that doesn't count as a result there. There's been some good wins over Adelaide and going over to Adelaide, but overall, it's not something that you really focus on there. The next one is the Brisbane Lions, and obviously having lost a grand final to them, that bumps them up to the ill will category. There's obviously when they were beating up on us through the 2000s, it was quite difficult there to focus on the Lions, but coming back to it, there is the Joe Danaher factor and now the Connor McKenna factor, but that's individual players. That's not the team itself. And they've been top 4 for ages and they don't seem to be going anywhere. So it's not really a side that you really care about at the moment, but you do still have that underlying rivalry with them there. I think the next side's very clearly going to be in extreme loathing, and I don't think I'm going to have any debates about that. I think they'll be number 1 for most people. Obviously, the 93 premiership, fantastic for Essendon. Carlton can't let go of the 99 prelim, although as we know, it's about winning it on the final day in September, not the second last Saturday in September. So, fair play, Carlton. And then obviously they've been pretty irrelevant for the last 20 years, but it's still great to grind them into the dust like we did last night. The next side is Collingwood, and I know for many of you, Collingwood will be at the extreme loathing end, mainly because of their supporters who, quite frankly, extreme loathing is probably a little low on the level for the way some of them act. But I think the addition of the Anzac Day game, I think, has a level of respect between Essendon and Collingwood fans that drops them down from that extreme loathing category. So I think they're in that second tier there. The next one is the Fremantle Dockers. And look, again, this is another meh tier side. Obviously, their coming into the league was a great benefit to Essendon because their terrible draft choices and terrible trade choices meant that we got Lloyd and Lucas, and that was fantastic for Essendon. So we want to thank Fremantle for that. And they also provided a bit of a retirement home for some of our older stars like Dean Solomon, Mark Johnson, and the like. They're Trav Collier as well. But other than that, not really, up there thinking about it. Obviously, when you play them, it can be back and forth, but they're usually really dour games and not ones you really want to remember. So they're meh tier for me. Next is Geelong. And yes, they are trying to push the rivalry with the country round. But again, this is an ill will for me. Obviously, they've been really good for a really long time and beating us a fair often and beating us quite well. So it is good when we do eventually get one over them. The 2011 game really stands out. Obviously, if you go back to that great shootout between Paul Salmon and Gary Ablett, that's a great moment, but it's not really something that a rivalry is built on. It's just a great moment. So, there's a bit of a manufactured rivalry there with the country round. So they're in the ill will tier for me. Next is the Gold Coast Suns. And, for Essendon fans, that's the meh tier. We remember the first game we played against them. We remember Kyle Reimers kicking 8. But other than that, it's not really much to write home about. But again, we do thank the Gold Coast Suns for providing us with our Lord and Saviour, Peter Wright. I actually have the Giants in the ill will category, mainly because they've been stronger competitors against us than the Suns have over the journey. And because of all the concessions that they got, has made it difficult to enjoy them. So I do enjoy beating them. That might be one that's a little controversial. A lot of people will probably have that in the meh tier, but I just have them in the ill will tier, a little bit higher than the Gold Coast Suns there. The next, again, is going to be our second extreme loathing. Every Essendon fan I know hates the Hawks. Obviously, those of us who grew up on stories of 83, 84, or who lived through 83, 84, 85 will have them up there. But then again, lots of games since then. Obviously, the famous line in the sand game, Lloydie coming off the line and killing Hawthorn's premiership defence chances in 2009. It's a great moment. And then throughout the mid-2000s, a lot of really close games. Obviously, Cale Hooker's goal in 2015 really stands out there, and there's a few others of that variety there. So Hawks are just slightly behind Carlton. I don't think they're quite as loathsome. When they're down, Hawthorn aren't as repellent as Carlton are. So that sort of drops them just below Carlton, but they're still in that extreme loathing tier. The next is Melbourne, and I'm going to have them in resentment. For most of you, it'll be about the 2000 grand final, which Essendon won comfortably. But I think if you think back to the 1950s and sort of that era, Essendon and Melbourne played some pretty close grand finals. So there's a lot of lingering respect there in terms of that old rivalry. And I imagine if you ask some of our elder Essendon supporters, Melbourne will be one of their more teams that they really didn't like to play against. So for that historical reason, they're up in the resentment tier. Oh, I do have to apologize. I have left a VFL side in here. I don't know why I've done that. I'll just put them in the irrelevant tier. Not really worth focusing on. The next is Port Adelaide, and I really hate Port Adelaide. I really cannot stand them. You know, they're obviously the Adelaide version of the Magpies, so they've already got that going for them, and they just keep stealing our players. You know, obviously Wanganeen in 97, Cockatoo Collins was a big one for me, and then going on players like Angus Monfries and Paddy Ryder going to Port Adelaide really hurt. So, you know, they keep stealing our players and they never give anyone back. You know, that's not really fair. So I really do like being Port Adelaide, and they're right up in the resentment tier. The next one is the Tigers. Again, another resentment tier, old rivals. Obviously, it's about the sashes, and obviously red sash is far superior to the yellow sash. Obviously, this year we've got over our losing streak against them, which was one of the highlights of the year so far. And obviously, Dreamtime is a fantastic event. Dreamtime's also almost created, you know, the same level of respect between Essendon and Richmond fans that there is between Essendon and Collingwood fans for Anzac Day. But again, you do love beating the Tigers, and it's a fantastic feeling when you do. So again, in the resentment here. The next is St Kilda. Again, a mess side. You can't really think of any moments against St Kilda. Obviously, the famous game where the lights went out, but that's just a funny moment. It's not really, you know, you hate playing St Kilda, and, you know, frankly, they're irrelevant almost. They do have that history of being in the competition since the beginning. And, you know, there's not much to say really with them. The next is Sydney, and I have them in the resentment. They're close to loathing. Obviously, we have the 96 prelim with Lockett kicking up behind after the siren to get them through. But then all throughout, particularly recently in the last decade and a half, it just feels like every time we go up and play them in Sydney, there's some weird occurrence or some disputable umpiring decision or non-decision in the case of the Gary Rowan mark that has led Sydney to win the games. And that just makes it feel really good when you actually go out and beat them, and you beat them fairly and squarely. And, you know, they look in at the umpires and they're expecting the free kicks and they're not coming and they don't know what to do. And then you win and you just celebrate because you've got one over them. They're the AFL's love child, and, you know, it feels good to win those games there. So Sydney are right up in the resentment category for me. West Coast Eagles, I think they're ill will in this category. Obviously, the famous Sheedy moment coming out with the jacket and waving that around, creating the scarf rivalry. And, you know, obviously during the 90s, Sheedy and Malthouse really didn't like each other. So that was quite a strong rivalry there. I don't think it's quite as strong now, but again, one of those historical memories there that keeps that sort of, you know, you still want to beat West Coast because they're pretty arrogant over there in Perth. And yeah, it's good to get one over them. Finally, we've got the Western Bulldogs, and I have them in the ill will tier. Obviously, another Marvel tenant like us, so we play them at that ground often. Famously in 2000, the only loss for that season against the Bulldogs. Again, that's one of those historical moments that creates that resentment there. So I have them in the ill will, slightly above the meh tier. You know, they probably could go in the meh tier if you're really thinking about it. So that's my list in terms of where I think teams rank in terms of their rivalry with Essendon. I'd love to hear what you think. I'm going to post a list to this tier maker along with this video, and I'd like to see your lists as well. So thanks for watching and have a good day. Look, I can't do that to North Melbourne. That's not really fair. I think, look, after speaking with Jono a lot, he has them as quite high, and I respect to him and the rivalry through the late 90s and early 2000s. I'm going to have them in the resentment tier, mainly because their fans are really pushing it so hard. It makes you resent their fans. So it's as much against their fans as it is against the club itself. So North, you're in the resentment tier right at the end there. You're above the Bulldogs. You're above the Eagles and Geelong. So you should feel happy about that. Anyway, thanks everyone. Go Dons. I'll see you next time.